Andre, welcome to the podcast. I know we've had a little bit of back and forth and troubleshooting getting this started, but yeah, I'm here in New York traveling, so did my best to get the setup going. And yeah, first and foremost, I want to introduce my audience to who you are and what you do, and I've got some great questions for you. So, for everyone who doesn't
Thank you,
know,
Michael.
Andre Walton is a TEDx speaker, a best-selling author, and social psychologist focused on organizational creativity. He helps people harness creativity and resilience to overcome burnout, increase emotional intelligence, and lead to positive change. So, Andre, my first question is, uh, first of all, I love that you're focusing on burnout because that's one of the most under-discussed issues with people who try to veer off the well-worn
Yeah.
path, head down the entrepreneurial route. It's like burnout is a real thing. So my first question to you is, how did you get started in all this, and why did you choose to make this the focus of your career?
Well, burnout has always been something that's in the forefront of my mind. In the last few years of my entrepreneurial phase of my profession, um, I actually suffered from very severe burnout. A number of things came together, and the whole the whole world felt as if it was imploding on me. So burnout has always been a sort of personal fascination to me from that perspective. And I think in particular that people who haven't suffered from, real burnout, I mean, burnout is an overused term to some extent, I'm really burnt out this week, real serious burnout is a very different phenomenon. And it's not something that is associated with a week or a day or even a month. So that's been important. Now, my solutions to it, which relate to creativity, they really have been a part of my life forever. I had very creative parents. My dad became a world-renowned artist, and my mother was also very creative. He was 60 when I was born. She was 25.
Wow,
And,
that's incredible.
that's sort of, it really is. But, you know, highly creative people have a tendency to be um, play a little bit loosely with the idea of social norms. They tend to be a sort of rough guide that you may or may not wish to follow. And so, and indeed, with regard to my mother, that had very negative consequences. When I was 7, she was two ominous, badly dressed men came to the front door of where we were living and carted her off to be institutionalized for the next year. And I think the prime reason for that was that this loose relationship with social norms was really had a very negative impact in terms of her acceptability to other people. They just, the good denizens of rural England in the 1950s didn't want anybody strange. They wanted people who were exactly like them, please. So, creativity then has always been a fascination with me. I started inventing things in my 20s and actually took 3 of my crazy ideas to be leaders in their field globally. And so when I sold my businesses, I did some consulting work, and then I went back to school to get a PhD in social psychology, and creativity in an organizational context was my focus. So that's really how all these things came together. It was a combination of the 3 strands of my DNA, really, which is, creativity, business, and then coaching, teaching, that kind of thing. So that all came together to create this Banishing Burnout program for helping people with burnout, anxiety, and stress.
So you mentioned, we use the word burnout um, passively and openly. And how would you define burnout in terms of what you do?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the medical profession doesn't consider it to be a unique um, illness. It just subsumes it under the heading of work-related stress. And that unfortunately moves the onus for this condition to the environment, to the work related. And I think the critical thing for me is that, yes, burnout is related to stress, but it's related to the fact that we find ourselves in a position where we do not have the resources to deal with the current challenges. And that definition is important because it doesn't dump the whole responsibility for burnout on the environment, like too much work or, work that's above our capability or whatever. It also gives us the responsibility for some of this.
Mm.
And that is very important when you're trying to overcome burnout, because if you don't have that, feel you have that responsibility to be part of your own recovery, then things can turn out very differently.
So, say an entrepreneur, yeah, I guess my question here is, what would be your number one piece of advice for someone heading down the entrepreneurial route to avoid falling into the trap of burnout? What markers should they look for? What measures should they take to be preemptive? What advice would you give to, the typical entrepreneur in this day and age?
Well, I think the key to avoiding burnout is really related to resilience and emotional intelligence. And
Mm.
this is where I don't want to disappear down this rabbit hole to too great an extent, but what we're really talking about here, if you think of it in terms of neural pathways, you've got two very distinct ways of looking at the world. One is the very logical, deductive way that in the developed world we tend to have as adults. And the other is with creative thinking. And if you see this on fMRI scans, they are totally different neural pathways. And it's interesting because the creative thinking pathway is actually the same as the emotional intelligence pathway. So,
Mm.
as human beings, if we sort of wind the clock back to when we were 1, 2, 3 years old, we've got no history. If we're trying to put, a puzzle piece into a partly completed jigsaw, we find something new and we need to find where it lands in our existing knowledge. We've got no picture on the box to guide us. I mean, we have to just make this up, and that means we have to have a very divergent view of the world. We have to look at everything in the world and see where this piece
Mm.
fits. And as we get older and more socialized, most of us will tend to get more deductive and analytical. So what this
Right.
tends to mean is that there's then an imbalance. So
Mm.
winding round to answering your question, it's really important to keep up activities that keep that balance in place. See, often
Interesting.
entrepreneurs, when they start, they've got a very creative view of the world because they're doing something new, whether you're developing software or,
Right.
or, or creating a laundromat. We need something new. Our minds are very focused on creative thinking and creating
Right.
something new. And then
But then you get
as
locked in your
as
ways.
on absolutely, and one of the real killers for creative thinking is structure. And as
Yes, it's like all
entrepreneurs,
the
and I know I've studied. What's that?
Sorry, Andres. No, we have like a second lag. I apologize. I don't mean to talk over you, but what you're saying is so fascinating because if let's just say Albert Einstein, all of his biggest contributions were very early on in his career: photoelectric effect, structure of the atom.
Yes.
I think once you're locked into the system, you kind of have this invisible box of what you can and can't do to push the needle forward, to think of this way of doing things that's monumental, that's revolutionary, that's groundbreaking, becomes less and less likely as you kind of get solidified in your career. And I love that you're bringing up that duality and the dual nature or the double-edged sword of honing in your discipline. This famous saying, sometimes science is more art than science.
Absolutely. And I think, you've hit the nail on the head there with the idea of the double-edged sword. I tend to look at it as if, when we're sort of born and when we're very young, we tend to have a view of the world that is very all-encompassing, as if somebody had taken us as an adult and put us in a world that was totally different to us. That we
Right.
just we'd be wide open to everything we're looking at to try and make sense of it. And that's what happens when
Yeah.
we're like 2, 3, 4 years old. No, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. But as we get older, it's like we're putting we're putting blinders on a racehorse, and we get more structured, we get more vertical. And you can see this even at the macro level. I mean, when I was a
Right.
kid, your GP, if you were sick, he would be, also be the one to put a splint round your leg. He would do. I mean, now if you go into a general practitioner, it doesn't really matter what's wrong with your body. The prime purpose of that person is to find you a specialist. So everything has
Mm.
become much more vertical, much more boundaried. And the problem
Right.
with that is that if you're trying to be creative and innovative, one of the real skills involved is to be able to connect disciplines and sub-disciplines in a way that
Mm.
is not usually done. You say, okay, well, they're doing that over here, so why don't we try that? And
Right.
that you sort of lose that with this blinkered analytical deductive way of thinking.
Right. Wouldn't you say that being deductive, it's not that it's not a question of good or bad. It's a question of sharpening both the skills of art and science and learning when to use which. So, learning
Yeah.
how to be super technical, super deductive, but understanding that you're in an environment where having emotional intelligence, like, you can put five brilliant people in a room and, the best problem solvers in the world, and they can't get together and formulate a startup because they're missing the emotional intelligence, they're missing the collaboration skills, and ultimately, we're all truly defined by our weakest component. So we can be extremely analytical, we can have extremely good deductive skills, but if we don't have a modicum of emotional intelligence, if we don't know how to leverage emotional intelligence to work with a team, we'll lose to a team that might be far less intelligent but understands how to work together.
Well, absolutely true. Absolutely true. But I think the point you're making there about having a place for both types of thinking is very important. And there's two analogies I use there. One is I happen to be a jazz musician. I play jazz flute, and in most of what you're playing, you're even if you haven't got music in front of you, you're basically playing with everybody else in the band. And if you've got music there, you're reading dots on a page, and basically you're playing within a very real structure that everybody else is equally following. And then when it's time for you to improvise, that's where you change the way of thinking about the music. You're no longer worried about, keeping in exact kind of pace with everybody else. You're allowed to do your own thing. And so, you've got, and similarly, even if people are very artistic, I mean, if you take a sculptor who wants to create some, beautiful thing out of a piece of marble, she's going to say, okay, well, now I've got to choose the marble, and I'd like to use Nashville marble because it's such a beautiful color, but then I know it splits when I hit it too hard. So then you've got all this deductive analytical process coming into play. Once that's all squared away and you've got the piece of stone in front of you, bam, you can go with a hammer and chisel and you're into the creative zone. So, it's important to have a balance between these two
Right.
things. And when you don't, a number of things that are negative can happen, not least of which is burnout. I mean, I firmly believe that burnout and the associated convergent thinking, which I call the sort of hamster wheel effect, means it's very difficult to get out of that frame of mind.
Mm. I mean, that would make sense. In the entrepreneurial world, you have a lot of people who are extremely, extremely strong analytical skills, and they might be really good at solving their problem, in terms of work, but they might not necessarily be good at
Yeah.
navigating the world around them. And sometimes even just giving them a little more emotional intelligence can help their ability to function exponentially more. I mean, and also I'm almost
Yeah.
talking to myself because, it's like emotional intelligence is important and it's something that came a little less natural to me than the analytical stuff. And it's kind of one of those things
Interesting.
where
Yeah.
if it's innate and it's natural, you can never really understand what other people might struggle with. So some people just have such
No,
amazing
indeed.
emotional intelligence,
Indeed.
and other people, it's like it has to become a science or like something that they literally focus on to get better at. So, you know, h- I wonder how you approach these problems. Like someone comes to you saying, "Hey, I mean, first of all, do you ever like go in to say, "Hey, what's your startup?" And you go into the team and you look at the dynamic and you see how do you ever like get into like the issues internally between team members? Is that something you focus
Oh
on, or
yeah.
is it like a one-on-one basis?
No. I'm a business coach, but I'm also a life coach. So I can bring a lot of
Mm,
different skills into this arena. And one thing that people don't think about, so going to say often think about, but I don't think they ever think about it, is that your role changes very quickly when you go from developing an idea, developing a product, creating a structure around that product, in other words, the company, and then growing the company. Now, there's an incredible change in attitude, along that path. And part of it is, if you're not careful, is going to be associated with losing the creativity you had in the beginning. Now, even if you've got a team, whoever is the kingpin behind the original idea, one, two, three people, but normally the real germ of the idea comes from one person.
mm,
They're going to have to be adaptable, or they're going to have to shift out of the way and go and create another idea and leave this lot
mm.
to deal with the problem. So, but the actual tasks in front of them, the goals, personal goals within the business, they change dramatically from pre-launch to typically to about 2 years after the launch. And you suddenly
Mm,
you're now focused not on developing a unique idea. You're now focused on developing a company. And that business structure that surrounds it can be very dampening to creativity, but it can also really play terrible tricks on somebody that drifted into this through a creative door, as in they
interesting.
invented something.
Right.
It's
So it's like,
it's a very interesting dilemma.
so your wisdom and your knowledge and your expertise is not just like a, hey, I'm coming in, what's your problem? Here's your solution. It's more of like it will like y- your skill set is going to adapt based on the progress of the company. So it's like you can be with someone along the whole journey. From
Yeah.
day one, you'll have one set of problems. Day two, you'll have a whole new set of problems. That's really interesting. Now, you were talking a little earlier about just divergent thinkers and convergent thinkers, and how does that how does that play with in the context of banishing burnouts?
Well, it plays a major role because the burnout, stress, and anxiety all create a convergent way of thinking. And this is well established. It's called seizing and freezing. And basically, if you've got a decision to make, you tend to, when you're under stress, you tend to grasp the first solution that comes to your mind, and then you stop looking any further. And that's a sign of this whole convergent process, because your window is becomes narrower and narrower on the world. So people with burnout and so forth, they have difficulty seeing the options. I mean, it's not seeing the end of the tunnel. They can't even find the tunnel. I mean, it really closes in on you. So you might have an incredibly, bright looking future, but whatever it is that's caused this burnout is causing you not to be able to see that. So what you do
Mm,
then when you're attempting to help people in that situation is you start to open up, get those blinders out of the way. And you do that by introducing everything that you can that is relevant regarding creative thinking. And that can include exercise, that can include increasing your interpersonal skills, because often a lot of people with burnout tend to reject the very people that could be helping them, and they tend to drift
mm.
back. So they haven't seen their friends for ages. Yes, they're still okay with their spouse, but she actually doesn't, or he doesn't actually spend much time at the home anymore, but and so on and so forth. So people tend to withdraw when they have these. So basically, you need to reverse all those processes. You see, no, go out and spend some time with your friends, spend more time with your family. Let's get you exercise is a very good process. One of
Mm.
the things that was incredibly powerful for me was meditation. And so meditation or mindfulness, all these
Mindfulness, love
things
it.
help you expand that field of view. And something you can
Mm,
see very quickly. I mean, one of the beta testers for my program said, Andre, I've been in therapy for 18 months to try and get back on my feet. In just 6 weeks of doing this, I've got to a place I never thought I'd be back to. And so, it can be incredibly powerful. It depends exactly what the amount of each of these components is, depends on the person. But, I build a structure around the 3 R's, which is recreation, its responsibilities, and its relationships. And in the first meeting with somebody, I will actually have the information to create a unique program for that person around those 3 things. So you start to move those 3 things in the right direction, and the light goes on very, very quickly, especially when you emphasize to people that, they are personally responsible for this burnout as well as environmental factors, because then they also own the solution.
Andre, it's been an honest pleasure talking to you. Where could people find you online?
The easiest way really is my website, which is Plan for Change, PLAN, the number 4, then the word change.org. So that's the easiest. From there, they can also email me. They can book a call and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's the easiest way to contact
Wonderful.
me. Really.
Where are you located, by the way?
I'm in Reno, Nevada. I've lived and worked in 7 different countries, and this is my choice. It's I can see the Sierra Nevada just to remind me of the beauty of the world.
Oh, I was expecting you to give me some European country. I don't know why. Maybe the accent. Who knows? But anyways, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for your wisdom, Andre.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Michael.